Making Monsters with Taylor Dahl. It's like beer and brats, a perfect combination.
You know the deal.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. We are kicking off my newest off-season series, and we've already talked a ton about that first pick that the Bears have, looking like Caleb Williams, but we went ahead and looked at all the quarterbacks to see what possibly that decision, which way it could lean. And now we're looking at pick number 9 and beyond some of that, because right now the Bears only have 4 picks, and so 3 of them will be at 9 and then another one later at the 3rd round. So I'm here to talk about that. What could they do after that first pick once they probably add Caleb Williams? And so we're going to take a look around the league at some of these teams I think will be a fit for the Bears, especially at that 9 spot. So today we are joined by Rob Moseley. He's the editor-in-chief for GoDucks.com. Rob, I appreciate you hopping on with me.
Yeah, happy to join you.
So first of all, congratulations. That was a really fun season for Oregon. And for everybody listening, Rob Moseley is as I mentioned, editor-in-chief. You've been a part of the communication staffs for the Ducks since 2013, but have been covering Oregon football for a long time, if I'm correct.
Yes, I'm getting up there in age, no doubt about it. I attended the University of Oregon, graduated in 1999, and have been covering the football team in some capacity since like 1997, 1998. So, starting to be kind of one of the graybeards around here on the beat covering Oregon football, and it's been a fascinating time to cover the Ducks because that kind of aligns with kind of the investment that Phil and Penny Knight and Nike have made in the program with uniforms and facilities and all the rest. So it's been pretty fun.
That's definitely one of the things that I think most people do talk about when it comes to Oregon are their uniforms every year. It's kind of fun to see what they come out on the football field, on the basketball court, all of those things. But let's go ahead, Rob, and jump into some of the Ducks that I think could be fitting for the Bears, or maybe just positional needs that the Bears are looking at. And the big one is Jackson Powers-Johnson. I do not think the Bears would take him at 9, but there are some scenarios people are talking about where if they don't get one of their top targets in a Joe Alt, a Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, one of those type of guys, that they could trade back just a little bit, maybe to somewhere between that 11 and 17, something like that. And here, he'll maybe go after Jackson Powers-Johnson. The center position for the Bears last year was one of their weakest positions. Multiple people played it. There were moments where the snap was going over Justin Fields' head and in between his legs, and we had to bench people and injuries happened. It was a complete mess. They kind of put a Band-Aid over it in free agency, but they still are looking for that center of the future. So let's start off with that. Let's start with the role that Jackson Powers-Johnson played for Oregon. Because when we look at this, Bo Nix really found himself with the Ducks, and it was really fun watching him this last couple seasons there, and had a career year last year, throwing 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. So I'm not trying to take any of that away from Bo Nix and his performance, but he was only sacked 5 times last year, and that is absolutely insane to me. How much of that of his production was helped by that offensive line?
Yeah, a ton. I mean, I think, when it comes to protecting the quarterback, everything plays a role. And obviously, Bo's a really mobile athlete, a really elusive player, and he could get himself out of trouble at times. I think schematically, there are a lot of instances where, he was able to get the ball out pretty quickly to all the athletes he was surrounded by on the field. But then, obviously, the offensive line plays a crucial role in that, too. And it was just a really high-level, experienced group last year. Some guys now that spring football is underway here, they're looking to find some replacements for, including Jackson Powers-Johnson. It was just a group that really came together well. After losing a really, really good experienced center in Alex Forsythe, who I believe spent last year with the Broncos with that organization. That was a huge question mark, and to be honest, I think you look at what Jackson Powers-Johnson had done earlier in his career. He was a guy who was willing to do absolutely whatever. So could play center, could play guard, even played some D-line when need arose a couple years ago. Just that kind of guy, kind of willing to do whatever. But on the other hand, not necessarily like, oh, yeah, it's just going to be plug and play at center. But he won that job and, was the best center in the country last year. So just shows kind of his commitment to his craft and his ability to kind of, take on a bigger role and thrive in it and not succumb to any pressure or anything like that. Obviously, that's a huge position in terms of communication, and I'm sure people have seen by now he's a really outgoing kid, really well-spoken kid, thoughtful kid, and kind of was able to take the reins as a leader there. So, really, kind of worked out, best case scenario for him and for the team, his ability to step into that center position last year.
Yeah, definitely ideal. And I think that it's something we were already paying attention to during the season. But ever since the offseason hit and certain moments happened during this offseason process, now leading us to the draft, which is 22 days away, we've seen more and more people talking about JPJ and how he could be that centerpiece for an offense like the Bears, because like I said, their struggles before, and it's been a long time since they've had their center that they could really feel comfortable with, that it was kind of that final piece. And you just talked about that, the communication when it comes to the offensive line and between the five of them on the line and between that quarterback. So how big of a part was he in? I know you said there was a lot of veteran guys there and that they all were kind of one big piece, but in the cohesiveness of that and the big role of being the center, how much was he a part of that part of it?
Yeah, obviously crucial. I mean, you can't hide if you're the center, because there's just so much communication that goes through you, coordinating things between the right side of the line, the left side of the line, quarterback getting checks in, communicating with the quarterback, communicating things from the quarterback to the other guys in the line. So, obviously, that's critical of anybody playing that position, and just one of the many things he thrived in. And the other thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, his athleticism is really something to watch in that position. I've never covered a center who, like, week to week would always have at least one highlight play where he pulled out and was 20 yards upfield throwing a block for a guy. Max Unger is probably the closest that I could come up with. And, he's a guy who had a long NFL career, after coming out of Oregon. An ability to bring kind of a pulling guard mentality and athleticism and production threat to an offense from the center position was really something as well. So, again, just so many ways that he really stepped into that role and thrived.
Which, yeah, and a part of that, I'm sure, is his experience in playing the guard position, too, which is beneficial because we see a lot of these guys around draft time that you want to draft, and maybe most of them have, at least in some point of their career, played somewhere else on the offensive line, but a lot of them were like, hey, 4 years they were a starter at right tackle, so maybe you can put them somewhere else, but you probably should play them at here. And it seems like you would put Jackson Powers-Johnson at that center spot, but him being able to do so many things, and like you said, it's something that normally you're not pulling a center like that. So that's good to hear, and it's something, especially with what we're seeing on defensive lines now, just because on each end we're seeing edges that can fly and that can get to the quarterback, and in the center now people want the pass rush coming from the inside more consistently, and so it's just such a major role. Like you said, you cannot hide when you're at that spot right in front of the quarterback. And you just mentioned a little bit about his personality. So maybe for the people who don't know, tell us about Jackson Powers-Johnson and just kind of how his personality, but also does he have that fieriness? Because sometimes those offensive line, you want them to be able to kind of protect and defend the quarterback when he needs to.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. So, since he got here, he was like first team all-interview team for local media, for sure. I mean, just a guy who's, again, really outgoing, really thoughtful, doesn't fall back on cliches, has the ability to kind of tell a story when he's answering questions. People go back and look at interviews he did, like at the Combine and things like that. He's willing to pull out these funny little anecdotes that help illustrate whatever point he's making, that just bring a story to life and make him really compelling and engaging to talk to listen to. Yeah, I think, you've probably experienced this. Offensive linemen just tend to be engaging, fun, intelligent, outgoing guys. I mean, they're just some of the really fun guys to be around. I think part of that is just the role they're used to playing. They're used to not being the face of a team. They're used to being kind of humble. So they can kind of make fun of themselves a little bit. And he certainly has some of that. He doesn't take himself too seriously. But when the lights go on, when he's on the field, he is absolutely an elite competitor. I mean, he's one of those guys where if you were in a fist fight and you needed to pick up somebody to have your back, that he's the kind of guy you would pick, because he just something changes and he gets a different look in his eye.
Yeah.
And he definitely plays with an edge. Certainly, again, you may have encountered some players over the years covering the sport where they were nice guys, and sometimes it felt like that was apparent on the field as well too. Like
Yes.
they couldn't flip that switch.
Mm-hmm.
And he absolutely can.
Yeah, it's definitely something we've noticed because we have a guy named Tevin Jenkins who is a fantastic offensive lineman. He has pretty much had to play everywhere on the Bears, but that's who I think of when I think of JPJ too, because he just has that where it's almost like teddy bear off the field, fun and
Right.
just kind of goofy, but then it's just a different human when you're on the field, and it's almost sometimes where you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But you also want that because these are the guys that are keeping your quarterback standing, and that's obviously important. So, Rob, without diving too, I don't want to deep dive into these X's and O's, but it looks like, as I mentioned at the start of this, the new Bears quarterback will be Caleb Williams. So how do you see, because you mentioned Bo Nix and how kind of his playing style was and how he could move around and kind of evade certain situations, but how do you see his strengths after being on an offense in front of someone like Bo Nix? Do you see that those strengths being able to transfer to the NFL in front of a guy like Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert on the X's and O's for sure, and I don't watch it. I watch the NFL kind of casually. So if there are big differences between the way the game is played, I'm not smart enough or paying attention enough to really notice. I mean, I do think it's having watched Caleb Williams a bunch the last couple of years, both Oregon faced him at Oklahoma, and then obviously when he was at USC, a conference opponent. He has some of that same slipperiness that Bo Nix has, in terms of, he can help his offensive line a little bit. And so I think, kind of that mental connection that Bo and JPJ had, I could see maybe something similar being able to be forged in terms of anticipating how your quarterback's going to move in the pocket, where you need to be careful, to protect him, where you can trust that he might be able to get himself out of some trouble. So I don't want to get too far over my skis here, but I think there's some similarities there in terms of elusiveness. Not guys that we're going to threats to run it 15 or 20 times a game, although they're both good enough athletes they could.
Mm-hmm.
But elusive enough to buy themselves a little bit of extra time in the pocket and then make a throw. I do see some similarities there that maybe for JPJ. If he does end up sharing a huddle with Caleb Williams, I could see him feeling like, this feels a little familiar in certain ways.
Yeah, that's the kind of vibe I got too when I was seeing just the numbers between the two and kind of their strengths and weaknesses. Let's switch over a few more for you on a couple of the other players that the Bears may have an eye on a little later in the draft, I'd say. A name you'll see on a list a lot of the wide receivers. PFF has him 39th prospect and 7th best wide receiver. These obviously, after those top 3 or 4, a lot of people move him up and down a little bit. But Troy Franklin, tell us a little bit about Troy and what he was able to do for that offense.
Yeah, I mean, he leaves here probably considered the best, the most productive receiver that's ever played here. Again, you talk about a guy who had a connection with Bo Nix. I mean, they really worked hard when Bo got here a couple years ago together, and then they took it to another level this past year. And Troy had the most statistically productive season of any receiver ever. His total receptions ended up, he broke the single season receptions record, and then his record was broken in the bowl game, which he sat out by Tez Johnson. But his ability, Oregon's had guys in the past who were long like Troy Franklin, who could get up in the air and make an acrobatic catch on like a 50-50 ball like Troy Franklin. And Oregon's also had guys with top end speed like Troy Franklin. But they've never had a guy who had that kind of a speed and that kind of length and that kind of acrobatic athleticism all in the same package, the way he combined it. So, really in the kind of the pantheon of receivers that have played here, he really, really stood out. Not a real stout guy.
Yeah.
I think that's something he's worked on, is to try to maintain all that speed and athleticism while putting on a few more pounds. But he is who he is too. So, he's not gonna suddenly be 220 or anything like that. So, but just a more of a serious guy,
Okay.
JPJ's kind of the goofy teddy bear guy. Troy is a little bit more serious, easy going, relaxed, but not kind of the outgoing charisma that a guy like JPJ has. A little more serious about his craft, serious in interviews, things like that. So, but a guy who obviously got the job done at an elite level for Oregon.
Definitely. And Rob, for people that are listening to this episode that may not know, because I think so much of the focus for the Bears because of that 1-9 and not having a second round pick, it's been Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors, maybe some Brian Thomas mixed in there are the names that they're really focused on. But Troy Franklin is, to me, one of those receivers that are just outside the first round, maybe mid-second round. He just has the attributes like you need. Like you said, he's not the biggest of guys, but almost 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. And a lot of people, I think the speed is a lot of the biggest, highest remarks that a lot of people talk about. And they're like, maybe not that initial speed, but once he gets going, he's gone.
Right.
Is there anything else to you and just that part of what he can do on the football field that really kind of stood out to you this last couple of seasons?
No, I think that's right, because he is big and long, and he's a long strider. So, he is a guy who, once he gets up to full speed and can really lengthen his stride, that's what really stands out. And, compared to like Tez Johnson, who's the kid who broke his receptions record in the bowl game, a smaller player, shiftier, maybe a little more explosive in tight spaces, and was a good, a really good fit as a slot guy, where, Troy was that guy outside who would just, get up the sideline and then, either break over the middle or what have you, and haul in a deep ball from Bo Nix. So, again, just being that home run threat, coaches talk about, you want a guy that can take a top off the defense, and Troy can do that.
So when you talk about, because you just mentioned Tez Johnson a couple times, so obviously Troy was splitting receptions with guys like Tez, who you just mentioned was able to do some incredible things too, another guy in Gary Bryant. And the Ducks were able to have the second highest scoring offense in college football, so they were just one of those high-powered offense were expected to score. What do you think led to that happening? Was it just a combination of these guys and Bo Nix having the season and the play calling, all of this combination kind of fixing into this season they were able to have?
Yeah, I just think, you look at the job this program has done in recruiting, going back to when Mario Cristobal was here and then Dan Lanning taking over and kind of, somehow taking it to the next level. Just as somebody who's covered this program for a long time, the ability to attract a five-star kid here and there over the years has been there increasingly over the last 15, 20 years. But in terms of the depth of talent, it's just, we've never seen anything like this around here. So, first of all, it all started with Bo. He was such an amazing leader for this program, such an amazingly productive player, and the connections he built with all those guys were a huge factor. Bucky Irving is a really special running back, a really, really tough player. And Jordan James, who's the next in line, kind of in that same boat. So you had a couple of some talented guys to run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
You could spread the field with a bunch of different receivers. The tight ends were really productive. Will Stein, the offensive coordinator here too, just did a great job of it was like each week was a different guy, a different matchup he felt like he could exploit, and then Bo would execute it. So, just when you talk about the depth of talent across the board, and including on the offensive line as well, it just really, I think, made this team tough to defend.
Yeah, thank goodness. I think a lot of teams are very thankful for the transfer portal because it's definitely given some of these, for players and schools, some of these players just kind of that fresh start and new place they needed. And Bo Nix, I think, is one of those. I remember it being criticized a little bit when Oregon first got it when he was coming from Auburn, and it looked for both to be the best decision he could have made. Let's run through a few more of these real quick. You just mentioned Bucky Irving. He's one of the running backs that are on the boards for a lot of people too, that is being talked about. But another name is cornerback Khyree Jackson. Tell us a few sentences on Khyree and what he was able to do there in Oregon.
Yeah, he's just really, really long. And you talk about a guy too who, found used the portal to get a change of scenery and found a place that had a need at his position, and then things just worked out great for both parties. I think that was the case for Khyree. Christian Gonzalez was a really, really elite corner a couple years ago. Was a rookie for the Patriots last year, was having a great year and then got hurt. And so, having another guy who was really long and athletic to replace him was a priority, and Khyree just came right in. Was really impressive. I think he really matured a lot over the course of the year. When he first got here, he was really fiery, and sometimes, you could see that get the best of him in practice, and the coaches have to get on him about kind of reining it in and not losing his temper, not losing control, not mixing it up after the whistle. I mean, he's a guy who loves to talk, so he's always going to be kind of in the middle of things that way.
That's that corner position.
Yeah, well, that's one way because Christian Gonzalez was a really soft-spoken guy. So,
okay.
I think Bo Nix made the comment, he was asked one time to compare him. He said, well, Christian never talked and Khyree never shuts up. So there's at least one difference between them. But, again, just a really productive player, really had a great year here last year. And, again, where kind of the fit was just perfect for both sides. And his length is just really elite. It was really, really special and made him a really tough matchup for a lot of wideouts.
Well, final one before I let you go. This one, I'm not familiar, and you may have to talk me through this one a little bit, but D lineman Brandon Dorlus, because I'm not quite sure of the rotation they had there. I don't think he was the main guy on that defensive line.
Brandon Dorlus was a primetime player. He wasn't, the stats might not pop as much because, he wasn't a guy kind of rushing off the edge. He could have been that. He was more likely to be playing, kind of over a guard, something like that, a little more on the interior of the line. But he's a guy who can move around and do everything. I mean, if they needed to play him at nose in a pass rush situation, he could do that. If you wanted to stand him up off the edge and have him rush the passer, he could do that. His versatility really is what stood out. If you looked at him, he's not a guy who stands out as like a nose guard in terms of his body type, but he could get inside there and mix it up with a center if he had to, or be athletic enough to pass rush against a tackle. So yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see kind of how he gets used, what teams think is the best way to take advantage of him at the next level, because he's a guy who, again, was kind of used in a variety of different roles along the defensive front here. But presumably an NFL team's going to say, hey, here's what we think you do best. We're going to have you do this. So I'll be really interested to see what that looks like.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of what the Jags selected Trayvon Walker first overall a few years ago, but that was a lot of the conversation because Georgia did so much with him, and he never really had one specific spot at Georgia, and they've still been trying to kind of figure that out in the NFL where to put him too. So he would be an interesting name of where exactly and what type of defense he would fit into when it comes to the NFL level, but that's definitely a name to look out for. Rob, thanks so much for hopping on with me. I really appreciate this, getting through some of these names, some of these Ducks that could possibly be Bears this next year. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to do it. Great talking to you.
You too. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
And so I think we're going to have a fun time as we talk about some of these offensive linemen, the wide receivers. We're going to talk some edge players, even go off the board a little bit, talk about a defensive tackle, guys like Byron Murphy, other names that we see towards the top of board. So what better person to start with today? We have a returning guest, Roman Tomashoff. He is the editor for UW Huskies Wire and host of Locked On Huskies. Roman, thanks so much for hopping on with me.
Taylor, it's an honor to be back. I appreciate the high praise there. It means a lot.
I love it. And obviously, we had a great time the last time we talked, and that one was more based around quarterbacks. So we talked a lot about Michael Penix. We did address some of the other guys like Odunze and some of the other, we kind of went down the list of the Washington Huskies we expect to see in the draft. But as we put a little bit more focus on some of these guys now that really look like they could fit and possibly land in Chicago, I think we can go a little bit more in depth on this. So again, I appreciate it. We're breaking up this potential second pick for the Bears into several episodes, calling it, I'm just saying, the 9th pick and beyond. So let's go ahead. We're continuing from, this is you're my second interview for this episode. I did Jackson Powers Johnson, and so now obviously that's the center for Oregon. A lot of people are talking about him. On that first part of the podcast, we did that. Now we're going to take a look at Troy Fautanu. Interesting path for Troy at Washington. He was redshirted in 2019. Then in 2020, due to COVID, obviously that was a shortened season. He did see action in all 4 of those games. But in 2021 is when you kind of started to see a bit more of Troy. And then he played in 9 games that season, starting 3, 2 at left tackle, 1 at left guard. So let's start there, Roman. What was going on Washington's line at that point to where he was seeing a little bit of playing time and kind of multiple positions, but wasn't quite on the field all the time yet?
Yeah, so that was just more of a fact. There were so many things going on at Washington 2021. That could be its own 3-hour show. But when I think about Troy Fautanu, I just remember watching that. That was my first season covering the team in professional aspect. And one of the biggest things about it was for a long time, he was projected to be a first-round pick. It was Jackson Kirkland, a left tackle. He got hurt. He had to miss a couple of games. And that's when Troy finally got to slide into left tackle. He comes back, and then Troy slides into left guard for a little while. And there were a lot of issues with guys playing overweight thanks to just the philosophy of the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. But it was always just kind of Troy's biggest issue, or not an issue really, is not the best way to put it. But coming out of high school, Troy's biggest question was putting on weight, keeping it on, and then just finding what position was going to fit best for him. As we know now, he's a fantastic athlete. He was back in high school. He played some volleyball. He was just all over the place. And it was always just, okay, where is this guy going to fit best? And so he slid in on the left side of the line really well. And then in 2022, Jackson Kirkland decided to come back again after dealing with some injury problems. And they flip-flopped where Troy finally kicked out to left tackle or full-time, and Jackson Kirkland was playing right beside him at guard. And it was just nice to just see the progression from 2021 to 22, where he was able to slim down a little bit more, play at a much better weight. And that was just kind of really the long-winded way of saying of how he got started.
Okay. Yeah. So were there moments already that season? You said that once he was playing that guard and the starting guy in front of him kind of came back. Were you seeing flashes even early of, okay, this guy could be a solid piece on this offensive line moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of Liberty High School in Nevada. And he was somebody where I remember the first time I saw him on the field in just an extended capacity, I kind of took a sigh of just like a big breath of relief because it was really nice to finally see him out there. And it's no slight to the other guys in the room. But when I saw him out there, it was, okay, this is one of those guys that the more you watch him, the more you know it seems like he can be a key piece of this offensive line for a very long time. And it was an exciting thought. And obviously, as we look at what these last 2 years turned into, it was cool to see that that's what the start of it was, where coming in relief and finally getting a chance to play turned into just stardom and an All-American future.
Yeah, it's definitely what you want when you can find those guys, the big guys on the offensive line that you know can, number one, be on the field. That's critical. And you see some guys have issues with that part of it, and you just spoke on it. That's kind of how he got to get on the field at first because some guys were dealing with injury. But when you look at that, it's so important and sometimes an underrated part of how offenses run smoothly. And we talk a lot about how, a team's built in the trenches, and it's something that the Bears are working on. We just saw Justin Fields get sacked 100 times in 2 seasons, and no quarterback should have to go through that. So the Bears are definitely on the way of fixing the offensive line. They obviously took Darnell Wright last year. They got Braxton Jones a couple drafts ago, and that's where my question comes to, where I'm not totally sure this is the route they would go. But I'm not putting it below Ryan Poles because he was a former offensive lineman. He takes a lot of stock in this when he likes his guys, and he believes that they could protect the quarterback. I do feel like it could, if it really stands out, it could be somebody that he has an eye on. But you were talking about that 2022 season and the jump from 21 to 22. So let's fast forward to there. He started in all 13 games that year, left tackle the first 3 games, switched over to left guard for a game, then back to left tackle. He got a couple offensive lineman of the week honors. honors. He had an offensive power player of the week. So this is when you really started to see him fall into place and get really comfortable on that line. What did you guys start seeing that season that really just started shifting? And I know you mentioned like the weight and him and getting all of that under control, but in general on the line, what did you guys start seeing where he really found a place there?
So it was the change of scheme, because that was the year
Okay.
Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb came in. So that was a really big helpful factor for him. And like I said, the whole offensive line got better with the whole strength and conditioning program changing up. That was a really big factor in them moving forward. But with Troy, one of the biggest things was it looked like he had a lot more freedom to do what he wanted. And it wasn't just in pass protection where, you know, he wasn't protecting Michael Penix's blind side, obviously, as one of the very few left tackles in college football who can say that that's what they were doing. And just the more that I look at him, not just as a pass protector, but as a run blocker as well, one of the biggest things that I know we're going to get into talking more about is his athleticism. And he was able to do so much with his athleticism moving forward, where he was asked to pull with Cameron Davis and Wayne Talapapa, the two running backs that season, being in front of them. He was the lead blocker on so many different portions. And it wasn't just him. It was right tackle Roger Rosengarten as well, where both of those guys are super athletic. And Ryan Grubb loved getting them out into space because he knew what a head of steam could do for those guys. And I know we'll talk about Rome Odunze as well. But the more I watched it, it was super fun because it's not just pulling them on run blocking plays. Ryan Grubb would set up these tunnel screens, all these different sort of screen actions where Troy Fautanu would be just running straight towards the sideline to start the play and would get like 20 yards in motion before he would turn upfield. And it was just so much fun to watch because he just moves so well in space. And it just felt like he was actually able to play to his strengths rather than what the 2021 scheme was, where it was just, we want to run the ball downhill. We want to play like it's 1947, which was just so frustrating to watch. But again, different story there.
I'm like, we've definitely seen that. Our offense had been stuck in the 50s for a very long time, Roman. What you just spoke on that, and that's one of the things a lot of people talk about is his athleticism. And I've read multiple draft reports and scouting reports of how a lot of people believe he is the most athletic of the offensive linemen in this draft, and that talks about his flexibility, how agile he is. You mentioned some of those things. Was this something you noticed right away, or is this something you saw just grow through those few years he was starting there?
No, this is something that honestly you could see coming since he was in high school.
Okay.
Where one of the things that I remember just like hearing for the first time, something I mentioned a little bit earlier, is when he mentioned that he plays volleyball, which was just kind of mind blowing. It's like, hold on, you do what? And then, so he had this whole long story about how he plays volleyball. And when you watch his high school film, you saw a lot of that. And I remember just like watching the high school film and seeing when I was sold on him. One of the first games of his senior year was when he went up against the number one recruit in his high school class. And that was edge rusher Nolan Smith, who, as we all know, first round pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. And he just went toe to toe with Nolan Smith, who, as we all know, is one of the most athletic edge rushers in the NFL. And when he was going toe to toe with him and really holding his own, it was, this guy's going to be a really, really good athlete. You just need to find a way to play to his strengths, which is why I think some people wanted him to move inside the guard, as well as, the questions about his arm length, which he put to rest at the NFL Combine. But when you combine all those things, you just see a super duper exciting prospect no matter where he plays on the offensive line. The comp I've heard for him a lot is Elijah Vera Tucker, who is exciting to watch at guard and at tackle. And I think he'll fit best at tackle, but he's got just an all-pro Hall of Fame ceiling at guard as well.
Those are some of the fun stories to hear about, though, because you just mentioned the volleyball thing. And I've done a lot of Making Monsters on, the Bears players, and I'll talk to coaches or family, and it's always interesting to hear how some of them did extracurricular things. For example, Kyler Gordon, Bears corner, he was a ballet dancer forever. And so he takes a lot of stock in that and how it made him even better at his position because of the things that he can do just at that level. When you watch him, like, he'll come out on the field and do backflips and do all that crazy stuff, but it also transforms on the field at other levels. Javon Dexter, he's a guy that played basketball. He didn't even start playing football until his junior year of high school, and was a basketball guy, but that's how it kind of helped his footwork, and that transformed to football. So those are fun stories of how these guys just kind of do those extra things to be better at a position, and you wouldn't ever really connect that initially that it would help.
No, absolutely. And shout out to Kyler Gordon, by the way. Not just a ballet dancer, but doing taekwondo, doing a whole bunch of martial arts as well.
Yes.
Another UW legend. Absolutely love Kyler and his whole family.
Yes, he's fantastic. He's one of my, definitely in the last couple seasons has grown to be one of my favorite players because he's just so much fun, and you see him get better and better by game. But when we're talking about Troy Fautanu, so we talked about that, the 2021, the 2022 jump, but 2023, it was just, he played out of his mind. He was named All Pac-12 first team. That was the second season in a row he did that. He started at left tackle all 15 games. So tell us a little bit for maybe people who didn't watch Washington too closely all season, or maybe for the ones that I think I joked about it last time when I saw people finally start watching Washington towards the end of the season and noticing how good so many pieces of that team was, especially offensively. But tell us a little bit about what the line looked like and how much that kind of factored into the success of other pieces of that offense.
It was the best offensive line in the country. They won the Joe Moore Award, which is given out annually to the best group, and a lot of it is because of Troy Fautanu at left tackle and Roger Rosengard at right tackle. Both those guys were excellent throughout the season long, and a special shout out to the center, Parker Brailsford, who was just a redshirt freshman, who did a fantastic job helping keep everybody together. It was a very cohesive unit. Everything about it was so impressive and so much fun to watch, and a lot of that started with Troy because him coming back, Michael Penix coming back, all the guys that decided to come back to make that run to the national championship was really what fueled it. And it always starts up front with all the questions that we hear about Michael Penix, with the injuries surrounding everything with the draft. They help put a lot of those questions to rest by just not letting opposing pass rushers touch him for the majority of the season. And it was just so impressive to watch because they were so cohesive. They were so well coached, and they were so athletic, getting out in space, being able to do all those things, helping Dylan Johnson rush for 1,000+ yards. And a lot of that started with Troy Fautanu, who definitely played with a chip on his shoulder. I remember standing next to him during the presentation of the Sugar Bowl trophy down in New Orleans, and there were so many questions about Texas being more physical, Texas being a better defensive line than Washington had offensive line. And I just remember Troy shouting up at the stage, "That's West Coast football. ESPN doesn't watch football." And it's just one of the most fantastic things I've ever seen. I remember talking to him about it after, and just the whole time we took that personally. We hated that. We just won the award for the best offensive line, and people still weren't taking us seriously. Yeah. And it was just awesome. And the fact that that's something that, he held near and dear to his heart throughout just that process is just awesome. And it speaks so much to his character and what he's like on the football field.
Yeah, and I love that. And that's the type of energy you like, too. And a lot of times with the offensive linemen, you get the ones who you don't see a whole lot of personality from. And then you have other guys like Tevin Jenkins, who is just like a massive, goofy teddy bear off the football field. But then it's a light switch turns on when he's on the field and he turns into an absolute beast. Is that the type of vibe you see from Fautanu? Or what do you notice when it comes to just like his personality on and off the field?
Oh, that's absolutely what it is. He's a wonderful kid off the field. Love talking to him. Love being around him. He gets rave reviews from all his teammates. But then, once he steps on the football field, you do not want to be lined up across from him. He's just a monster when you get on the football field.
I love it. When you talked a little bit about his versatility, and we mentioned a lot. He did play guard. He played a whole lot of left tackle. And did you say you believe he'd be better at guard at the next level?
I don't know if he'd necessarily be better at guard. I just think that he would just be a really great matchup on the interior. Okay. But I just think with his athleticism and with everything, you absolutely have to give him a shot at tackle before you might consider making that move.
Yeah. And I think a good thing, too, when you are drafting linemen, to look at guys who are versatile because especially the way injuries happen on that offensive line, the way that sometimes you have to shift things apart. And that's kind of been Tevin Jenkins has dealt with a lot of injuries, but he's played everywhere. He's played left tackle, left guard, and right guard. So he's just one of those, and has played at a high level at all of those. So to have someone, like you said, who could be a good left tackle, but if you need to swing him inside, or if they are comfortable with Braxton and they move him inside, he could still be a solid starter at those positions. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of coaches are looking at when they're looking at Fautanu, is that versatility, obviously his athleticism. When we talk a little bit, because it looks like it's obviously not done, but it looks like Caleb Williams will be the quarterback for the Bears once in a few weeks once the draft comes. And so I know, obviously, the playing style of Michael Penix and of Caleb Williams, very different. How do you think that he would be able to alter and to play on an offensive line in front of a guy that is like Caleb Williams, who is maybe a little more shifty, moves around a lot? The offense is definitely a little more gimmicky a lot of times with him than it would have been in Washington.
I don't think that's something he'd have a problem with, and it all points to his athleticism, points to his IQ on the field. Where one of my favorite plays, and it doesn't have anything to do with this, but at the same time it does, where when the Huskies went down to USC to play against Caleb Williams and the Trojans this past season, there's one play where he got his helmet knocked off, and he just keeps on running, plays through the play, and just knocks the guy over. Gets a 15-yard penalty because even though it's, that's besides the point. I won't get into that. But even though he just continued through the play, it all spoke to his athleticism and just his toughness and what he's able to do just when a play kind of breaks down, where all the abilities that he has will thrive out of structure, where he's somebody who is never going to, just give up on a play. He's always going to keep going. He's always going to keep fighting. And with somebody like Caleb, who likes to get out of the pocket, who likes to run around and likes to just hold the ball sometimes for a little bit longer than maybe he should, Troy is the perfect guy to have in that scheme because his arms are long enough to fit the scheme. He has the athleticism to just stay with a guy and not just, 2 seconds release, 3 seconds release on just kind of a drop back rhythm passing sort of offense where he can hang with no matter what's going on behind him.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Bears fans would want to hear because that is a couple of the concerns. There's a million positive check marks by Caleb Williams' names, but the couple that pop out and worry a little bit are the holding the ball too long. That was a problem Justin Fields had also, and he also fumbled a ton. And some of that comes from playing that hero-style type of football. He wants to make the big play and doesn't sometimes want to throw it away. And those are all things that are fixable, but they are two things that obviously having a solid offensive line that gives him that time to throw and where he's not getting hit and not having to make some of these crazy plays. That is exactly what the Bears are probably looking at, especially his rookie season when he'll be getting a little more comfortable inside in the NFL, obviously. But Roman, thanks so much. I think that when you look at this Washington offense, it was so much fun to watch. And I wrote down some of these numbers, and the offense had 6th most touchdowns in college football, 3rd most first downs. They had the most passing yards. It was just stat after stat of how successful. And I think it was, you mentioned the coaching and how when the new coaching staff came in and kind of everything shifted, that was beneficial. But also when you look at the weapons, and we'll get to those, we're kind of doing a part 2 coming up in a little bit for the receiving weapons. But when you look at the weapons he had, when you look at the offensive line, when you look at, Michael Penix being able to stay healthy and how beneficial that was, it was just really fun to watch Washington's offense. What are you guys thinking now with all of these pieces kind of heading into the NFL now?
Well, there are definitely some. You're absolutely right. It was just a treat to be able to watch this team, to follow them, to cover them. It was truly nothing short of just a magical season. But moving forward, I'm really excited about the future, where there's still some really exciting pieces at receiver. I really keep an eye on sophomore receiver Denzel Boston, Cal transfer Jeremiah Hunter, are two guys who they're not Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan or Jalen Polk, but they're very, very talented in their own right. I really like the scheme that Jed Fish and his coaching staff are bringing in. They did a fantastic job developing talent at Arizona, and I think the defense is going to be a whole lot better than it was last year. I know that. Bill Belichick went viral for his appearance at Washington.
Yeah.
Defensive coordinator Steve Belichick. It's all wild to me as a New England Patriots fan that I was standing 5 feet away from Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I get that.
Truly will always and forever blow my mind that happened. But I really think that the Huskies, while they're not necessarily going to be, I don't know if I'd call them a dark horse contender to make the college football playoff, because there's still a lot of questions they need to sort out. It's going to be a very exciting, very fun team to watch with a really, really talented coaching staff.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting season for Washington. But like you said, and thankfully for nowadays the way the transfer portal works for teams, that you don't have to see when you do lose these guys to the draft, even if you're not Alabama or one of those SEC schools, you still have the opportunity to just kind of build and move on a little quicker than maybe it was, a few years ago before it was the way it happened. But I want to talk a little bit. I said we're going to do a separate episode on this because I do have just kind of the receiving weapons episode coming up. And with that one, I'm going to cover Neighbors, Dunze, and Brock Bowers. But I want to jump over to the other side of the line, the defensive line, because I mentioned for me, the biggest needs that the Bears need, I would put edge at number 1 and wide receiver at number 2. It kind of goes back and forth for people because some people say they still want to see that wide receiver addressed. But to me, looking at the offense with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet, I really like the offense, but you do want a young guy to come in there. But I just put edge a little bit before that, and a name that a lot of people talk about is Bralen Trice. Some of the numbers that I was seeing with him among Power 5 edge rushers, he had 67 pressures, which was first in college football, 91.4 pass rush grade first, and 31% pass rush win rate first. But I feel like maybe because of Dallas Turner and Jared Verse sitting up there, we are not hearing his name talked about as much. But tell us a little bit about Trice.
Oh, I love Bralen Trice. He's somebody who, he didn't just lead college football and pressures last year. He led college football pressures in 2022. Okay. Ahead of guys like Will Anderson and pass rushers that were in that class as well. And Bralen, he's kind of fallen off some people's radars over the course of the testing process where, as you said, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Laiatu Latu, where some of these guys have been receiving a whole lot of love, where Bralen didn't necessarily test very well. He dropped a whole bunch of weight before the combine, where he was playing somewhere between 270, 275 pounds all season long, drops 245, didn't necessarily have great testing numbers at the combine, but he's somebody, when you turn on the film, he's got a motor that doesn't quit. Some of the UW coaches in conversation I had with his former edge rushers coach, Eric Schmidt, a couple of times now at this point, he consistently comps Bralen to Raiders edge rusher Max Crosby, where he's just got a motor that doesn't quit. He's got an awesome variety of pass rush moves, and he's somebody who, when he's on the field, he's going to pride himself in defending the run just as much as he is when it comes to rushing the passer. Yeah. And he's somebody who you're going to want to leave on the field at all times because he's so strong, so consistent, so good at what he does. And he's somebody where right now it seems like he's probably going to go late second, early third round, and whoever ends up getting him is going to get a steal with him.
Yeah, and that's where I'm kind of looking at it with this, because let's say the Bears end up getting Rome Odunze at 9, and then you want to address that edge at some point. They don't have another pick until round 3. So if Bralen Trice was sitting there once they get to that third round pick, I'm with you. I would take him in a heartbeat, and I think it would look really good to sit there and have Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, and Bralen Trice added to your team with those first 3 picks. So it's definitely somebody I have an eye on. I saw a chart the other day that kind of had it was one of the vertical horizontal axis, and one side was like pass rush win rate, I believe it was, and the other side was I'm trying to remember, I can't remember the other vertical axis, but they're obviously the top right of this chart. I was trying to find it to bring it up, but the top right of this chart is where you want to land, and it was guys like Will Anderson and Dallas Turner were up there, but Bralen Trice was right there. I mean, I think almost overlapping Will Anderson when it came to these specific numbers that they were tracking. So I agree with you. It's definitely someone that I am looking at, and it would be fun for you. You could cheer for the Bears then with 2 guys over there.
Hey, I already root for the Bears in my spare time. I'm on from Chicago. I love watching the Bears, especially now that they have Keenan Allen. Oh, it's one of my favorites.
So much fun. It's going to be a very fun year if Caleb is even anywhere close to what people say he can be. But Roman, thanks so much. Like I said, we have another. You're coming on with me too to talk Odunze, so we'll do that. But I just wanted to say thank you for talking Troy. I know Bears fans are definitely, a lot of people are shouting for some sort of offensive lineman just to kind of put the final check mark on the offensive line and be able to bring Caleb into a situation where he doesn't have to deal with what Justin Fields did the last couple seasons. So thank you for joining me and talking Troy Fautanu and Bralen Trice, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
All right. Thanks so much.